What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Tinted Visors podcast. Hitting you guys with episode 33. We're going to take a look at the Central Division and give a little outlook. But with that being said, let's get things going.
Yeah, before we dive into the Central Division teams, we have card of the day. I'll be going first. Sticking on theme, we have a Central Division card. I picked this one up this past weekend with Kenny at a show, actually. We have a Dylan Gunther Young Guns. This is from the 22-23 set. It's from Series 2. I love the design. I really like the blue. There's kind of like some like flames in there. Really cool design. And, Gunther, he was picked with the Canucks draft pick that they traded to Arizona. So he's always going to hold, a little bit of a soft spot in my heart. Got a really good deal on this, so I was happy to pick it up and add it to my collection.
Yeah, sweet card. We'll get into Gunther later when we talk about Utah, but he's had a great start to his career. I'm also sticking on theme here now that he is with the Nashville Predators. We're going to go with another Steven Stamkos autograph. It is a Panini card, so they don't make cards anymore, so it's pretty rare. 69 of 99. It's got that blue auto on it, a little crown die cut there. Really nice card back in, I think it's 11-12. Yeah, it says it right on there. Got a nice pickup. Caden helped me out, negotiate a deal, try to cut down $20 on the card. But yeah, it's a nice card and newest member of the Central Division.
Yeah, sweet card. You also picked that up this past weekend, and when we saw it, just a card you don't really see too often, Panini in the die cut. So super sweet card. You got a steal on it, I think. Able to work that price down. But yeah, super happy for you to add that to the Stamkos collection.
Sticking with the tradition we have, we're going to start with the bottom up, and we're going to go with Chicago, last place in the Central Division. They were not a good team last year, but they did get a lot better in this offseason, bringing in a defensive pair in Alec Martinez and TJ Brody, as well as Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, and Ilya Mikheyev in that Vancouver cap dump. A lot of help bringing in for Connor Bedard in that offense. Caden, what do you think of Chicago's additions?
Yeah, I love all the ads that they had. They have that cap space. They're going to utilize it, like that trade with Vancouver, picking up Mikheyev in that dump. But yeah, Bedard's got some new potential wingers in Teuvo Teravainen and also Tyler Bertuzzi. So it's good to see him getting some help, and they reinforced the back end as well, like you said, TJ Brody and Alec Martinez. So yeah, the Chicago team I think is still a bottom five team in the league. But I'm expecting they had 52 points last year as a team. I'm expecting, maybe around 60 this year with this new and improved Chicago squad.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see how well Bedard can do with some help. I mean, he had almost a point per game, and he had basically no big names on his line. So adding a guy like Bertuzzi, adding a guy like Teuvo Teravainen, it'll really help his point totals. Same with the defense. I think Martinez and Brody will really help guys like Vlasic and Korchinski really develop their game and sort of round out them to be top four defensemen. One other thing, I would like to see Lucas Reichel break out. I think this is pretty much his last chance with the Chicago roster. He's drafted about 5 years ago now, and he just hasn't broken out. Chicago, I would say 2 to 3 years out of the playoffs, and then contention, got to give it 4 or 5 years. What do you think?
Yeah, it kind of just revolves around Bedard and how they can build this team around him. So yeah, like you said, I think the playoffs are a little bit further away than that. I think they're about 3 to 4 years away from the playoffs and then contending pretty soon after that. But yeah, back to Connor Bedard. The Chicago Blackhawks don't currently have a captain, Kenny. So would you like to see that C go to Bedard? And if so, when would you like them giving it to him?
I think that's the most logical solution. You saw it with McDavid, you saw it with Crosby. Even I think Landeskog was really young when he got it too. I wouldn't rush it. I don't think he needs to be it next year or this coming season. But I think next season we could definitely see the C on his jersey. I wouldn't blame them if they try to rush it and give it to him now. But again, still really young, so I would see them not having a captain this year. They're not going to contend anyway, so I would see next season, even maybe the one after that, with the C on his jersey. Moving up the standings, we're going to go with the formerly known Arizona Coyotes, and we're going to go with Utah Hockey Club. A lot of big defensive additions this offseason, bringing in Sergachev, John Marino, Ian Cole, really solidifying that top six. No real big forward moves. Not that they really needed it anyway. They got guys like Cooley and Genther, like we mentioned, having really good last half of the seasons, in addition to Keller, Schmaltz. Yeah, Utah, a lot of defensive moves, like I said. Caden, what do you think of this new look?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this Utah squad, and they did reinforce that blue line. Mikhail Sergachev, he is coming off that pretty gruesome injury last season, and he does have that big extension at 8.5 for the next 7 seasons. So there may be some question marks surrounding that, but I don't hate the move for them. I think, if he can stay healthy, I think there's some good value in that contract. And yeah, looking up front with their forwards, they have a good mix of guys, in their prime and some young guys looking to take a step. Like you mentioned, Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther. I think this Utah hockey team can be kind of dangerous going into next year. I think, if they over exceed expectations next year, there's a chance that they could make it in as a wild card. But as it stands, I think there are, 3 to 4 teams in the Central better than them. So I think playoffs this year are a long shot. Kenny, talking about playoffs, how soon do you see Utah back in the playoffs?
I wouldn't see it as too much of a long shot if they were in contention for a playoff spot this year, but definitely within the next 1 or 2 years, I could see them making the playoffs. Even last season, there were some times where they were kind of pushing for that wild card spot, and I wouldn't be surprised if they could do that early this season. But yeah, looking at the team, Michelli is looking like one of the biggest steals of the 2019 draft. We say it over and over again. I'd love to see a full season of Josh Doan, even though he won't be sort of the Coyotes legend Shane Doan. It's now Utah, but I would love to see him get a full season in. I don't think Iginla makes the roster right away. And then Ingram looked really good as a goaltender, and he's still got 2 years at under $2 million. So that's a bargain of a contract.
Yeah, so we look at Connor Ingram between the pipes, came from Nashville, spent some time over there before joining the Utah Hockey Club. Kenny, is he the answer for Utah between the pipes, or do they need to look elsewhere, look for a young goalie prospect or even trade for a bona fide starter?
I don't think there's any rush to sort of pick up a starter like a John Gibson or, a younger guy like an Askarov or anything. I think Ingram showed that he can do well against big teams, against really good teams last season. And I don't think that's going to change this season. He's got an even better defense in front of him. Obviously, if he were to falter early on in the season, I can maybe see them looking for, a 1A, 1B situation. But right now, I think Ingram is their guy, and I think he could lead them to a strong performance this season. Again, moving up these standings, the Minnesota Wild, a perennial first round team, pretty much a guarantee to make the playoffs every year, fell out this season. And, I think the buyouts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter are finally kind of catching up to them. They are going to pay them $14 million this upcoming season. And that's a huge blow to your cap hit, especially when you're trying to contend. They have a lot of young guys that kind of make up for that when they're on their ELCs, like your Marco Rossi's, your Brock Favors, Liam Ogren even could get into the lineup this year. Maybe even Wallstead. We'll see how many games he can suit up for. But again, $14 million, it's not a really good look. And then in addition to that, the money that they did have, they spent on a guy like Yakov Trenin, 4 years at $3.5 million. Just didn't really prove anything with Nashville or Colorado. Didn't prove a $3.5 million contract, that's for sure. I'm not sure where that kind of contract came from, a little bit of a head scratcher. Still got some good players on this team. Caden, what do you think of this Wild roster?
Yeah, a little bit of an odd one. They're pretty mediocre, but they do have some stars in Kirill Kaprizov, who had a great year last year, had 46 goals and 96 points. Look for him to take another step with a Wild squad that can bounce back and, maybe break 100 points this year. And even Matt Boldy, the emergence of Matt Boldy, when he was healthy, he looked great. He's on that extension, very team-friendly deal. And yeah, you mentioned these young guys stepping up. Brock Faber had a ridiculous Calder campaign last season. We keep talking about it. And if it weren't for Bedard, I think that Calder was his. But yeah, you talk about that dead money going to Suter and Parise. It's hurting them. And hopefully they can get some guys on ELCs to step up. But yeah, just looking at the Central Division, they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot. Maybe the 3 seed in the Central I could see, but more realistically, a wild card spot. But Kenny, do you see the Wild making the playoffs this season, or is it back-to-back missed playoffs for the Wild?
I think it's definitely a possibility. Looking at the teams in the division, I think the top three are locks in Colorado, Dallas, and Nashville in no particular order. I do think Winnipeg takes a step back. They did lose a lot in free agency, so I think that wild card is up for grabs, whether that's St. Louis, Winnipeg, or Minnesota's to take. So I do think if they have a strong season, I think a lot of guys, if a lot of guys step up, like you said, on their ELCs, if a guy like Marco Rossi can have a really good season, I think that can sort of carry them into a wildcard spot. But like I said, that top three is pretty much locked in. I don't see anyone cracking that. Again, up the standings, going to the last team in the Central that missed the playoffs. It's the St. Louis Blues, another team that's pretty much a lock to make the playoffs every year. They did fall short this season. And for a team that didn't make it, it's kind of surprising with the moves that they did make. Just, nothing really game changer. They brought in Radek Faksa, Matthew Joseph, and Alex Texier. I think they were all trades. no big signings. They did move on from the Kevin Hayes contract, so that did free up some cap space, leaving them with around $7 million. But again, no real big changes. Caden, what are your thoughts of this roster? Is it enough to make the playoffs?
Yeah, considering that they missed last season, there wasn't really a sense of urgency to kind of push for the playoffs this offseason from the Blues. And you look at the roster, there's a ton of, experienced vets on that team, led up front by a guy like Brady Shen. And then the blue line, they're an old blue line. There's that news about Torrey Krug. I think he's going to miss this season, which is a tough loss for the Blues, especially their offensive production from the blue line. But yeah, they have all the tools to make the playoffs, in net, Jordan Binnington, and they do have some punch up front. But yeah, it's going to be tough in this Central Division. I don't think they've done enough to really make the playoffs and improve themselves enough from last season to this season.
Like I said, they're pretty much fighting for that wild card spot, and I do see them looking like a better roster than Minnesota, so I would give them that edge. Like you said, Binnington and Hofer was a great tandem last year. They're behind a subpar defensive core. Binnington looking like the starter for Team Canada come Nations League. So we'll see what the pick is there. Like you mentioned about the aging D core, they're all 30 plus, that top four, and they all make more than $4 million, most of them making 6.5 and up. So it's a lot of money tied into a lot of aging guys. Look for a guy like Scott Prunovich to take a step forward. He needs to have a full season, a full healthy season. Was a really good college player, so I'd like to see him take a step. Another interesting college player they have is Jimmy Snuggerud. Obviously, great performances in college and in the World Juniors. I would love to see him give that sort of scoring punch in the Blues lineup, whether that's a second, third line role. But we'll see if he can make that roster. But yeah, playoffs, I could see them squeaking in, making that wild card spot this year. Contending, though, I don't think it's here. Maybe 2 or 3 years from now.
Coming in fourth in the Central Division last season, we have the team that claimed the first wild card spot, the Nashville Predators. Made some big splashes, so I'll throw it right over to Kenny. What do you think of Nashville's moves this offseason?
Yeah, I like them. They definitely got better. And you look at the roster of last year. It wasn't a great roster, but they managed to pull off an incredible run in the last half of the season. I can't remember what the streak was, but they managed to squeak into the playoffs. And then you add on top of that, you give them Stamkos, Marchessault, Brady Shea. I mean, that's going to be a contender for the playoffs for sure, and then could be possibly a contender for the cup. I gotta love what Barry Trotz did. He's a very aggressive general manager. Last season he brought in Nyquist and O'Reilly, and it worked wonders for them. And now they're gonna bring in three more stars. Obviously, everyone's gonna take a shot at the term and the cap hits, and yeah, it's gonna be a little high, but it's similar to what I said about Boston. You pay those guys for the next 2 or 3 years. That's your real window. After that, you kind of just deal with the contracts. Yeah, 8 million is going to be a lot in 4 years, but if you have a cup, that's going to make things all better. So I think realistically, their window is 2 to 3 years with those contracts. After that, they just deal with them. But I like what they did. They're going to be a contender in the Central Division, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think my favorite signing was the Jonathan Marchessault signing. 5.5 million just as a dollar value for a 40 goal scorer is, I think that's good value there. Yes, he is 33, and there is a little bit of term on that contract. But yeah, and the Brady Shea signing, I think Brady Shea is super underrated as a defenseman, so I think that contract itself has a good chance to be, really good value. And then Stamkos, I think, was a little bit of an overpay, just considering how his 5-on-5 play has, kind of fallen off, but he is still lethal on the power play. So yeah, look at this Nashville team to, make it into the playoffs once again and make a little bit more noise than last year.
Yeah, a lot of big splashes. Interestingly enough, they got $11 million that are buried in buyouts and retained salary with Duchesne, Johansson, even more players than that. One big storyline for me, I would love to see an Askarov trade. Obviously I wanted to see him, build his way up with the Nashville Predators, but after that Saros signing, you have to think he's on his way out, and the value he has right now must be, enormous. I would think they bring in a couple roster pieces, maybe some guys on their ELCs so it barely takes a hit at the cap, and really round out that core. So I think if you can add one or two more pieces to this roster, it's really going to make them lethal, and I think that Askarov is going to be a big trade chip for the Nashville Predators.
Yeah, you see that Sorrow signing and, the writings on the wall for Askarov. I think he knows that he's going to be on his way out. Not really sure how Nashville's going to trade him. The asset management, a little bit poor. Personally, I would have rather seen Askarov get traded before they signed Saros. Just considering other teams will be looking at Nashville and seeing that they have Saros. They're obviously not going to play Askarov, might give them a little bit more leverage in negotiations. But yeah, regardless, I think an Askarov trade would, light the hockey world on fire.
Obviously, I mean, I think they're in the playoffs. I'm sure you think they're in the playoffs. Are they contenders? Do you think they can go on a run this year?
You look at this team, and it's just one of those teams that when they make the playoffs, you don't really expect too much out of them. Maybe a second round exit at best, but they are also one of those teams that could definitely go on a run. Come April next year, depending on how the bracket's looking, I could very easily see Nashville making a run to the conference finals.
Into three seed of the Central Division, and they're not really a three seed team. They're much better than that, but it was very competitive last year. We have the Colorado Avalanche, around $5 million left in cap space. They didn't really make any big splashes in free agency or really any sort of trades. They lost Landeskog past couple seasons to an injury. Not sure when his return is going to be, and they've lost Nichushkin indefinitely with the players assistance program. So that's two big top six wingers that are just pulled out of your lineup. They bring in a guy like Parker Kelly. He is not the answer, I'm sure. Eric Brandstrom could be a very good bargain for them, and then also a depth defenseman in Calvin DeHaan. Caden, what are your first thoughts of this new Colorado roster?
Yeah, it's tough looking at this forward depth up front, and you think back to that depth that they had when they won that cup in 2022, and looking at the forward depth now, it's just in shambles, and it's a far cry from what it was, when they won that cup. So I like the small moves they made. I think Eric Brandstrom, like you said, could be a very good bargain. I still think he has a very high ceiling. He was, the main piece in that Mark Stone trade to Vegas just a few seasons ago. And then Calvin DeHaan, yeah, serviceable veteran, just to kind of shore up that blue line defense. But yeah, my main concern is not only the goaltending with Georgiev, can he bounce back and be a serviceable goalie for this Avalanche team, but also that forward depth. Their depth pieces and their stars are going to have to step up in a big way. This Avalanche team is very top heavy, led by McKinnon, Ranson, and Makar, the big three. So we'll see how far they can drag this Avalanche team.
Yeah, you talk about that forward depth, and that second line's really going to need to step up. As soon as McKinnon steps off of the ice, Drouin and Middlestat really need to produce. They did really well last season, so I would like that to continue. And like you mentioned about Georgiev, he's got a lot of wins in a high number in the wins column, but he has very subpar numbers, both save percentage and goals against average, and it's just not something you want from should be contending team. You definitely want a more consistent goalie. Um, but pretty early prediction here. But Caden, what are your thoughts about Nathan McKinnon? Can he break his record of 140 points? What do you think he's going to get next season?
So yeah, McKinnon's coming off of a phenomenal year, obviously winning the Hart Trophy. We know how you feel about that. But yeah, I think he's due for some regression. I really, as superb a player he is, I really don't see him, smashing 140 points again this year. Especially considering what this Avalanche team is kind of looking like going into next season. So yeah, I could see like 120, 130 range, but I don't think he gets close to 140 next year.
Yeah, I agree with you. 140 is a hard feat to top. On top of that, another prediction. Where do you think Colorado can go this year? Can they go to the conference finals? Can they even reach the finals?
Yeah, it's tough. They're coming off of that first round exit after winning the cup against the Kraken just 2 seasons ago. And then this year getting bounced in six by the Stars in round two. I think they're due for another run. They still have all those pieces. We talk about that big three. That big three can lead them anywhere. So honestly, I could see them, maybe in the second round matchup against Nashville. I think would be a hell of a series. But yeah, I could see them, definitely. I think they have a path to returning to the conference finals and maybe even the cup final once again.
Yeah, I mean they were my pick to go to the finals this year, coming out of the West, and it's hard not to have confidence in that big three that you talked about. It's a thinner squad, that's not debatable, but I could see them going at least second round, maybe conference finals. I think finals is a bit of a reach, but still very good players on that Colorado roster. Going to the second in the division, the Winnipeg Jets bounced in the first round by the Colorado Avalanche after going all in at the deadline, bringing in some rentals in Toffoli and Monahan. Both of them walk in free agency. Winnipeg, it's just tough for them. It seems like no free agents want to sign in Winnipeg. Luckily enough for them, they do get their guys to stick around, like your Shifley, your Connor, your Hellebuck. But Yeah, it's just tough for them to attract any free agents to that city. Winnipeg still has $6 million in cap space, and Perfetti still is an RFA. 38 points on the season. It was a good start to the season, but near the end, I don't think he was even playing. I don't think he touched the ice in the playoffs. Some reports to say that he's going to be on the move, but we'll see about that. No 1 point per game on that roster. It's just not looking too strong for me. Caden, what do you think of this roster?
Yeah, I think Winnipeg is due, for some big regression. I think up there with the regression that I think Carolina is also going to have. But yeah, you talk about no one being point per game. That's just not sustainable. Yes, you have a great defense. You have the Vesna winning goalie in net, but you still need to get him some of that goal support. So I think it's really going to hurt. They might, squeeze out some really close wins, but they could also have some really close losses, a lot of them this season. But then, you talk about the Nick Ehlers rumors and even, Rutger McGroarty kind of forcing his way out. I think this Winnipeg team still is a couple big moves away from the start of next season. So I think this team could look a lot different from now and when the puck drops in October. So depending on those moves, I think they're due for some regression for sure. I think, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how far down the standings they fall.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I was just going to say it's a huge offseason for Kevin Cheveldayoff because if you can get the right return for Perfetti, for Nick Ehlers, for McGroarty, if you can really round out and get some roster pieces back, some hockey trades, you can really make this team look good. As bad as it sounds, I mean, Winnipeg has to bring in guys that don't have a choice to play for them rather than sign them in free agency. So they have to get them through trade. Like you said, the decor isn't too bad. Obviously, the Vesna goalie in net. If they can just make good trades here and bring in some solid roster pieces, I think they can. I don't know if they can get second in the division again, but I think they could still push for the playoffs. But like you said, I think they're due for some regression. Are they a playoff team? Maybe the wild card. What do you think?
Yeah, I think worst case scenario, these guys are still snagging a wild card one, a wild card two. I don't really see them missing the playoffs. I think there's too much talent on this team. But yeah, like you said, I don't think they reach that two seed again. I think they're, some regression is imminent, and I would still be a little bit concerned if I were to pull this Winnipeg team in the playoffs, like if they were an underdog. If I'm a one seed and I'm seeing Winnipeg in the first round, I am not happy at all. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, how far they fall and who leapfrogs them this season.
We talked about McGroarty last weekend. What do you think of that situation? I mean, he's demanding some top 6 minutes and he's demanding some power play time. I mean, how many teams are going to back away from a trade in that guy?
I think Kenny. I think that's why we haven't seen him moved yet. I think he's biting off a whole lot more than he can chew. He has never touched the NHL ice. He played at UMich. It's a completely different game in the NHL. Like this is a grown man sport now. So to be demanding top 6 minutes power play time, I think that's why he hasn't been traded because teams look at him fresh out of college and they can't guarantee that. There's only a certain few that can, go straight from college to the NHL and, really make an impact like that in the top six. A lot of guys need room to grow. So I think his demands are completely unrealistic, and I think that's why Winnipeg hasn't moved on from him yet.
Yeah, and we also talked about just like what the feeling would be in the locker room once if he gets traded. He walks in and all these guys kind of take a look at him and just say like, well, who does this guy think he is? Like, demanding some ice time, demanding my ice time, my power play time, and all that. So I think just kind of an uncomfortable situation on all sides. I really hope this doesn't become a trend in players demanding trades and demanding ice time. And last but not least, the champions of the Central Division, the champions of the Western Conference, the Dallas Stars. $6 million in cap space. They still have Thomas Harley to lock up. I would go with either a bridge deal or a long-term deal. I could see it going either way, but he had 47 points this season. A little quiet in the playoffs, but still a very strong player. They're led up front by Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, and Wyatt Johnston. All three players are complete studs on that team. Robertson, a little bit downgrade, going 80 points from 100 plus last year. So maybe something to look at. No real big changes to the roster. Obviously, Tanev leaves, and so does Ryan Suter, as well as Pavelski announcing his retirement. Caden, what do you think of this Dallas Stars roster? Are they still good enough to contend?
Yeah, they were my preseason pick last year to win it all, and it might just end up picking them again. This forward depth is absolutely insane, and when you look at a player like Jason Robertson, like you said, going from 100 points all the way down to 80, you expect some regression, in the team performance as well. But these guys were the champs of the West, Kenny. Like this forward depth is absolutely insane, and a lot of people thought Duchesne would walk for more money. He decides to stick around in Dallas. Yes, they lose Pavelski, Suter, Tanev. this is still a very solid team. And, the blue line takes a massive hit losing two vets, but Miro Heiskanen, Thomas Harley, Esa Lindell, like there are still so many serviceable and very solid defensemen on that blue line ready to contribute. Dallas has all the pieces. I think they can absolutely make another run next season. And to me, I think it's cup or bust for them. They have all the tools to make it work.
Yeah, I completely agree. Still a very, very deep squad. And I think it is cup or bust. Jake Ottinger's got one more year left at $4 million. He's going to get a raise from that in the next offseason. And who knows how much that could be. Maybe that could hinder them in the future. So this season really is cup or bust. Joe Pavelski obviously retiring after last year. Obviously, no one's going to fill those shoes, but if there was someone to sort of pick up that ice time, it's a guy like Logan Stankoven, comes up halfway through the season, has a really good performance, and I could see him cracking the top six and having some really good plays, a lot on a line with a guy like Wyatt Johnson, maybe even Jamie Benn, bringing that line back together. One interesting thing for me is both Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin make over $9 million. Seguin 50 points, and then Jamie Benn had 60. Are the Dallas Stars ever going to win with both those contracts on their books? Or do they have to move one out in order to win a cup?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. They both had solid seasons, but obviously not $9 million solid. And yeah, that really just adds to the cup or bust next season because you have guys on ELCs like Wyatt Johnson, like Logan Stankoven, who are going to, outperform those ELCs. And then Sagan and Ben obviously underperforming the 9 million. So to me, it's got to be next season. It's got to be before these young guys start asking for extensions. You mentioned Jake Ottinger's contract, and the young guys Johnson, Stankoven, they're going to be getting those contract extensions soon. So yeah, just really ups the ante to win next season for the Stars.
Yeah, as big as they've been for the Stars and the city of Dallas, I have to think that one of them's got to move on in order for them to really sort of, buy into Stankoven, buy into Wyatt Johnson, and go for a cup. But with that being said, is the Cup Finals your prediction for them? Is the Stanley Cup your prediction?
Yeah, it's still very early in the off season, and a lot can change from now and in October. But yeah, to me, it's Edmonton and Dallas running it back in the Western Conference Final again.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Winnipeg taking a step back and Colorado taking a step back. I think it's Dallas's division to lose. They still look really strong, and like you said, I think Dallas could meet Edmonton in that conference finals.
So, Kenny, that wraps up the Central Division with the Dallas Stars. I think it's pretty clear to say that we both have them finishing one as it stands right now in the division. But if you had to pick another team in this division to win the Central Division, who is your pick and why?
It's tough to make a prediction this early. We did say, Winnipeg still has a lot of moves to make, and we don't know when those Colorado players are going to make their way back into the lineup. But looking at the rosters right now, looking at every single one, I think it's got to be Nashville. They have, the second deepest roster in that division. You can call it bias if you want, but, looking at the uncertainty of Colorado and Winnipeg, I just can't guarantee them fighting for that first place spot. And while I do think Dallas comes out on top, if I had to pick a team to challenge them, it would be the Nashville Predators. So yeah, guys, that wraps up the Central Division outlook. Let us know what you guys think. I think the top three, like I said, is pretty much a lock, but that wild card race is going to be pretty big in that division. Looking for some big steps up from Chicago and Utah. No playoffs quite yet for them. But like I said, let us know what you guys think. We have the Metro coming up next week, and then after that, we're going to have a lot of off-season content for you guys, a lot of predictions, a lot of hot takes. We're going to be excited for that.
Yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll wrap up the division outlooks with the Metro next week, and then we'll move into some other things. So yeah, see you guys in the next episode. You down. Oh, she wild inside emoji. Oh, you got a friend. Tomato to my haters. Hope you get lost.